6 degrees of freedom, or 6DoF for short, refers to movement in a 3D environment. With 6 degrees of freedom, you can not only move freely on all three X, Y, and Z axes, but also rotate around them. For clarity, in this video the axes are as follows. The X-axis is the first horizontal axis, and movement on it corresponds to moving left and right. The rotations around the X-axis correspond to looking up and down. The Y-axis is the vertical axis, and movement on the Y-axis corresponds to moving up and down. The rotations around the Y-axis correspond to looking left and right. The Z-axis is the second horizontal axis, essentially giving us depth. Movement along the Z-axis corresponds to moving forwards and backwards. The rotations around the Z-axis correspond to banking left and right. In Overload, you have no restrictions on movement on these axes, and the ship you fly essentially has thrusters on all of those axes. Think something along the lines of a cube with a thruster on each side. When all of these options are combined, some truly strange and unpredictable movement options become available. Now let's compare it to Counter-Strike. With movement, things are pretty straightforward. You can move freely on the X-axis, strafing left and right. On the Y-axis, however, the movement is limited, as you can only jump for a small temporary height increase or fall to lower ground. This is where the 0.5 degree of freedom comes into play. There are two exceptions, however, and those are movement underwater, where you have full 5DoF movement, and on ladders, where you can move vertically up and down freely. On the Z-axis, you once again have complete freedom of movement, as you can move forward and backwards without restrictions. When it comes to the rotations, things get a little tricky once again. The X-axis rotations deal with looking up and down, but you cannot do a full rotation around the X-axis without leveraging either the Y or the Z-axis rotations. Since Z-axis rotations are not possible in Counter-Strike, we have to use a Y-axis rotation in conjunction with an X-axis rotation to do a full rotation around the X-axis. The Y-axis rotations can be done independently from other axis rotations, meaning you can look left and right freely. And finally, Z-axis rotations are not possible in Counter-Strike, which means your character is technically always upright straight. This means that tilting in Counter-Strike is in fact impossible, even when some guys rush people.